I'm good. I'm pretty good.
Yeah, so you want to introduce yourself, tell people where you lie in the political spectrum, and where people can find you.
Yeah, I'm Haas from the Infrared Show. So Infrared is basically a platform. We call it Marxism, Leninism, in the Age of Multipolarity and the Post-COVID World. Um, I suppose we're Marxist Leninists, but we have a very unique perspective on the implications of Marxism, Leninism for the West. Um, I'm not sure what else to say.
All right, thank you. All right, so here's what we're going to do. Each person can give an opening statement about the topic and your stance. After that, we will open up the floor. Make it 1 to 5 minutes. For those of you watching, if you have any questions, make sure to tag politically provoked who your question is addressed to, and we will end up having a cutoff once we get too many questions. Once the cutoff happens, we will only be taking super chats. So if you want to make sure your question gets read, try to get it in there on the sooner side. After the Q&A, we'll do closing statements and final thoughts. So I don't know, Haz, you want to go start? Do you want to start?
Sure. I guess I'll begin with this. Um, to me, the question of discussing fascism is a question of history. Currently, I can't really identify a real significance of fascism in the 21st century uh, beyond certain kinds of movements in Europe or Eastern Europe that claim certain historical continuities. And then, of course, you have the case of probably the best example, which is Ukraine, which claims continuity with Ukrainian fascism. But ultimately, to me, historically speaking, the phenomena we call fascism was more or less completely absorbed by the American unipolar system that was starting to emerge following World War II. Fascists were employed as kind of mercenaries and hired thugs of American global imperialism. And this, to me, is its only real lasting significance and legacy. I think the question of communism versus fascism was a question that was sorted out in history itself, specifically in the history of the Second World War. Um, Today, it's my view that while I don't necessarily consider everyone who calls themselves a fascist to be on par with the historical evil that I believe fascism was, I do think it is a deep confusion and a deep source of let me what's the word? It's a deep source of misdirection as far as thinking about and mustering a real critique of 21st century global capitalism is concerned.
Thank you. Culture Thug.
All right. Yeah, some of the Nazis went over to America. They also went over to Soviet Russia too to work in their science as well. So everyone who could get their hands on a lot of these people did. I would wonder, since you started off about the contradiction, what is the contradiction you see in third position to global capitalism?
It's the same contradiction I see anarchists have, religious fundamentalists may have, various other ideologies may have. I see it as a kind of purely negative stance. I guess you could say more or less it's what Marxists would call false consciousness. Although I don't want to be as crude and reductive as that, it seems like a pretty accurate simplification to me that while coming from a maybe authentic discontent with the global order or the respective orders and establishments of the respective countries, it lacks the necessary clarity as to its own real object. Um, I see it as a step in the wrong direction, basically.
But what specifically, like what? So when we look at the third position economic platforms, when we look at systems like corporatism, where does this not address the bourgeois and international capitalism Aren't these methods of socialism stemming from syndicalism that address the capitalist system and put the capitalists at the boot of the state? I mean, isn't this, it's not central planning, it's a mixture of these things, but it's not adherent to capitalism. So I don't see where is the misstep and then dealing with global capitalism. If we're talking about the history now, and obviously the only two third position governments that came to power was Italy and Germany. So with them in particular, what do you view outside of theory? What do you view like specifically that they were doing that you say, you know what, they weren't really taking on capitalism by doing this?
Well, I agree. I do want to move beyond theory and go to concrete examples. And I would go even farther and say it's not even so much about capitalism specifically as it is about the alignment of classes and material interests that existed at that time. And it's very clear to me that the fascist regimes in Italy and Germany served the interests of the military industrial complex, the network of industrialists and financiers who needed war to prop up their existence as a class.
But that's not the reality. That's just because you're building for a wartime economy. It's the same reason why everyone wants a nuke today. It's a bargaining chip, right? In those days, there were no nukes. So if you didn't have a military, you really didn't have a voice on the public stage.
It's not really that they built up their military. The Soviet Union also built up its military, but it's the purpose for which they built up their military. And the purpose for which they built their military was to embark on foreign military adventures, not because they actually represented some kind of authentic national interests on the part of the peoples over which these governments were claiming to represent, but almost in a completely shameless, direct way to basically like pirates to loot and pillage resources without any right, without even being able to establish any right to it whatsoever. Like, what real claim did Italy have to Ethiopia? What real claims did Germany have to Eastern Europe? Now, some may make the argument that Germany may claim continuity from the Habsburg Empire and the Prussian Empire, but this isn't true because, at least in the case of the Habsburg Empire, this was a multi-ethnic empire, which was not a nation state. So the German nation state had no claim over the territories of Czechoslovakia, Poland, etc., etc., etc. And also in the case of Italy, I think, I don't know if it was Lenin who stated Italy was what was it? The poor man's imperialist state. It was the imperialist state that just was kind of like the sore loser, right? To me, it's very clear that fascism was the mode of transition into the era of global imperialism that the old liberal democratic states were just not equipped for formally.
So with Germany first, I mean, I do think there was cause, at least they laid cause out to the German minorities being persecuted in both Poland and Czechoslovakia, even some towns where there are German majorities being suppressed by the Polish and the Czechs. So there was a reason that was directly intertwined with their nation. And I think mainly when you're talking about, and I would argue Britain was more to blame for the start of World War II than anyone else. But I think you're talking about too, when we talk about Russia, we're talking about the living space. Now, this was something Hitler had preached since the early 20s, that Germany needed more living space, and they're going to take that living space from the East and Russia. So whether that was, whether you think it's a right move or a wrong move or whatever, it was tied in with the nation. And it was something that many Germans agreed with. I mean, once again, he said this very early on, and he stuck with it, until he declared war on Russia. So it's like they were nationally. It just wasn't war for war's sake. There was a national reason for this. And this is why many of the Germans were fanatically supporting him, because they were reclaiming lands they had lost during World War I, and two, they were saving German minorities that were being persecuted in these countries.
Well, so about the persecution of what is a minority in a certain doesn't give you claim over the whole territory of that country. You may attempt to use, if what you're saying is true, that they were in fact persecuted, you may use your diplomatic and soft power resources to pressure them in a certain direction, but this does not give you claim over the whole territory of Czechoslovakia and Poland. If you are making Germany a nation state and saying this is the land of the Germans, then those German minorities are free to emigrate to the land of the Germans, the German people. It does not give them claim over other nation states, which are comprised of other entirely different peoples. Now, there may be German minorities in those states, and that doesn't entitle them to ownership of the entire state. My main point about it being outside of the authentic national interests of the people within those countries is that these were military adventures. They had nothing to do with any real genuine historical claims or national liberation. It was a military adventure concocted by profit-hungry industrialists and war profiteers in order to sustain a dead system, a system that would otherwise have collapsed or was on its way to collapsing.
What
Hitler
system is
was classical liberal capitalism. And Hitler was promising his people the living space because Hitler didn't want to engage in a land reform within Germany. He didn't want to break up the big estates of the Junker nobles and aristocrats. So he promised them the land of Russia and so on. It's very clear that fascism was a tool of the ruling classes of these respective countries to avoid the social revolution that was otherwise inevitable at home.
So first, back to Poland. You didn't need to take the whole country, except they were forced into the war. When they wouldn't break on the Danzig, they were forced into a world war. Britain had declared war. So it's like there's no choice then.
Question, but I don't mean to cut you off. The question, though, is who forced the Germans to invade Czechoslovakia?
They also had a minority there. That's when they first went in there, is to protect their minority there.
They may have justified it on that basis, but a minority being persecuted in another country does not give you claim to annex and conquer and turn this other country into your living space. This defies the basic, as Stalin said, a person who thinks in this way has the morals of beasts. It defies all human convention that you consider yourself entitled to the land and resources of another country on what basis? I mean, you can say it's to protect the minority. Why not evacuate this minority to the German state? The Germans already had a state. So why not invite this minority in Czechoslovakia to live in Germany if they were so concerned about the status of this minority? It doesn't make any sense.
Well, I'm glad you said annex. It shows soft power there. But because the borders of Germany was drawn up by the Versailles Treaty, it wasn't something created by Germans.
That's correct. But as Stalin noted, the Germans did not stop with reclaiming the territories lost after the Versailles Treaty. They kept pushing forward more and more for more. That is way outside of the bounds of any territory that could, remotely be argued to be justifiably theirs. This is why Stalin said, many are claiming Hitler is a nationalist, but he's not a nationalist. If Hitler and the fascists, the Nazis in Germany were nationalists, they would be content with reclaiming the historical national territory of the German people, specifically that were lost after Versailles. But they didn't do that. They kept pushing for more and more that in no way could be argued was rightfully theirs historically.
Well, the outbreak of World War II was over the Danzig. So, I mean, it was over disputed territory because of the borders drawn after Versailles. That's what outbroke the war. Then after that, it was World War after that because they would not.
the Czechoslovakia as a whole was invaded. It wasn't just that the Germans took back the territory that was lost. They wanted more territory, even more than what they had previously lost.
Yeah, and the Czechoslovakian government capitulated to them willingly. I mean, it's so when that's given to you, I mean, you'd have to be a fool to turn it down. Let's go to
What,
this.
wait,
This
what do you mean
capitalist.
what do you mean they capitulated willingly? I don't see.
There was no resistance. There was no resistance to it. There was no resistance at all, and a lot of people welcomed them in. And
There
a
was
lot of
no
these,
resistance on part of the Czechs to the German invasion.
no major resistance. No, no. So, but and then we could talk about the Eastern Bloc, and then a Soviet power came over there. But I want to get to this thing about fascism being capitalism and decay. This is something I hear often, and is usually from Marxist or whatever shade of Marxist are around today. There's so many. So let's get to the bottom of this. So how are they keeping? If you have a capitalist elite that is propping up these organizations to fight off the Bolsheviks or communists, German communists at the time, you would imagine that they would have to be funding this party from the beginning, building it up. But when we see in reality, there was no major funding for the Germans until the 30s, early 30s, when they started to gain power. Then the businesses started coming in and playing ball. Until then, they lived off membership dues. They lived off Hitler's selling of Mein Kampf. Until then, they were banned repeatedly, not allowed to speak, imprisoned, broken up. So it doesn't fit this narrative that this group was propped up by capitalism. And mind you, the whole world of capitalism went to war with the authoritarian states in World War II, Japan, Italy, and Germany. So it wouldn't make sense to like, hey, capitalism is dying, and so we're going to prop this group up, and then we're going to declare world war on it and tear it apart in every single country. So it just doesn't fit that narrative, especially when you look at the funding of the party, especially of the German party. There was no big business supporting these people. It was off of membership dues. So I just don't see how. And then when we talk about when they gain power, whether in the corporatist state in Italy or whether the mixed economy of National Socialist Germany, it wasn't the executives that had the last word. It was the state. It was the state.
Okay, so two things, because I could detect two errors in your argument there. The first one was that the Nazis only received funding and support from big industries and business after they got to power. If anything, it's almost the opposite. It was well before they got to power in 1933 that they acquired the support of the major industrialists and so on within Germany. Now, it's later in the 1930s, I believe, that there was some rifts, something like that. But what you said is not true. The second thing is, and that's not to mention the fact that both Hitler and Mussolini were seen as the heroes of Wall Street, the heroes of industrialists the world over, who envied them and admired them and saw them as the saviors of liberal order and so on, Western civilization. Now, in the case of Italy, you say that executives did not have the last word as far as the matters of the state were concerned.
Mm-hmm.
And you're correct. They didn't. And that's because Mussolini explicitly stated that, to paraphrase him, the ethical state must confine itself to the strictest and sole spheres of government, the police, the military, and so on and so on. All other spheres must remain in the hand of private individuals, including secondary education. This is what Mussolini said. For Mussolini, the state could not be an economic state whatsoever. Maybe he changed his mind later, but I can pull the quote if you want. I think I have it.
Oh, that's
here.
fine. It took them 10 years to get the corporatist system up and going in Italy, because unlike Stalin's Russia or Hitler's Germany, you had a parliament and a king there. So it's a little slower for them getting it started, but they ended up getting the corporatist. 33 officially, the corporatist state was in play, which put the end nail to liberalism. But first, going back to Germany being funded, I would suggest two books for people who would like to believe that. German big
Please don't show this stuff on stream. I mean,
why? Oh, why? Oh,
hold on.
okay.
I fuck me. God damn it.
What's happening?
Fucking God.
What happened?
What's going on?
All right, I won't show it on screen because, for whatever reason, German big business and the rise of Hitler.
Dude. I'm on Twitch, and you just showed a fucking swastika. I got banned for that before, man.
Okay, well, I don't know. I've never been on Twitch, so all right. So I'll make sure not to show anything controversial. German Big Business and the Rise of Hitler by Henry Turner Jr. I would advise people to check that out.
Can you not show that shit on stream again so I can start the stream?
Yeah. I'm not going to show it. I already said I'm not going to show it. And then this one, there's no cover to it, so that's fine. Hitler and the Rise of Wall Street. Also, none of these are favorable books, mind you, but it'll break down to when they started getting the funding, and it was 32 that these businesses funded into them. It is not a reality by no historical account that's dug into this, whether biographers or whatnot, that they were getting funding from anyone outside of maybe a Thule society aristocrat here and there.
Can you give me a second? I'm deleting shit, and
is Twitch that crazy? Really?
Yeah, they're that bad, man. It's
In Italy, I agree. I think Ethiopia was a wasted venture. It was stupid. I didn't see anything good with that. It was Mussolini trying to flex power. His military was very weak, as shown in World War II. So yeah, I don't disagree with the whole Ethiopia.
I didn't hear anything you said after you showed that shit. I have not heard anything you've said, so I don't know why you're. I don't. Should we keep going? I don't know. I really don't know if I should keep going or.
I don't know.
I had to delete. I completely deleted my stream. Everything.
So what do you want to do?
Should we do this at a different time, and I'll be aware not to.
I need a clearer idea of what the rules are. I need a clearer idea. I don't know. Someone's saying it's in context, okay, but yeah, I need a clear idea.
No, that's fine. I wouldn't risk it if I was you. Yeah.
Okay, I got yeah. Guys, if you guys are watching this now, there's not going to be a stream for the rest of the night. I'll stream tomorrow. Yeah.
So do you want to end this or?
Yeah, I'm gonna go. I gotta check out what's about to happen.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I gotta go.
Okay, so
All right. A lot of buildup for nothing.
wow. All right, that was interesting.
We're getting stuck in history too. I don't like that, but it's just like don't.
That was all right. Let me see if there's any questions that we can ask you. That was wild. Okay, I'm a little thrown off, but what is these questions like from freaking? Okay, this is what I was saying to the chat. Anytime like we have like a third positionist or like communists, there's all these freaking names. Like I can't fucking.
I know.
Q&A, and it drives me crazy. I'm like, I can't fucking pronounce half of this shit.
You know what? Neither can I, and I make videos on the shit. So yeah.
What the hell? Let's see. What does this say? Does Twitch let you show a hammer and sickle and make Stalin memes? Gee, what a coincidence. Interesting. Okay.
It's a tiny little one too. I didn't even. It's like in the corner. I mean, I could think I could show this without getting banned here. It's in the fucking. I didn't even realize. I just wanted to reference it to people because this mythology of their capitalism decay is always there. It's because
I'll continue.
Okay.
I'll continue. A lot of people are confused and they're thinking, oh, he must be running away from the debate. When my whole fucking Twitch, like, this is about the fucking, this is about maintaining my fucking platform, you dumb fucks. But if you really want to fucking press me on it and piss me the fuck off, then I will continue this fucking debate. So where did we last leave off? Let's go.
All right. So we were talking about how German.
And by the way,
national-
guys, it's not streaming on Twitch right now, so this is just going to be on Politically Provoked. I'll link it on the YouTube and the Discord. Hold on. Go ahead. Where did we last leave off?
Huh?
Where did we last leave off? Go ahead.
Okay, we're talking about the German finance industry did not fund the German Workers' Party during 22 to 32.
Okay, but that's not true because they received a 100,000 mark donation from the German industrial group as early as the 20s.
So the only thing they have flicked from the AEG director, 32 to 3. No, it's so once again, when we look at the sources.
Which sources?
So Hitler and the rise of Wall Street and the rise of Hitler, and German big business and the rise of Hitler. And this also goes into many biographies on Hitler and all that as well. They all point out how not only was big industry not supporting them, they were going against them. Once again, they were banned numerous times from speaking.
But what does that have to do with big industry? That's the government. That's specifically the German government was banning the Nazis and so on. I don't deny that.
Yeah, with who the big industry is working with at the time. Is that liberal democracy.
We all examples. Give specific examples.
Of what?
Big industry working against the Nazis.
By the people they supported in the Weimar Republic that was going after
the reasons the Nazis were repressed by the Weimar government was an extension of their function as enforcing law and order against hooliganism and against street violence and all that kind of stuff. Where did German industrialists specifically, because you remember the Weimar Republic was still formally a democracy. So it wasn't an open dictatorship of industrialists and capitalists in the same way the Nazis were. It was still pretending to be a democracy. So my question is, in what way were the German capitalists, outside of the repression by the government against the Nazis, in what way were German capitalists working against the Nazis?
By not funding them and by funding the politicians running against them.
But they did fund them.
They didn't fund them. That's once again, there's nowhere in any of these books, any of these things that any of these historians written about where they said the industry was funding them. Once again,
I think you just didn't read enough books then.
No, I did. Believe me, I did. And that's the reality of it.
Okay, well, I think
only this Trotskyite slander of fascism being capitalism in decay is something that comes from not being well depth in it, because it is not that simple. And then you could also say, so if you want to get nuanced, so you talk about Germany and Italy, but then we also have Spain, Romania, England, all these third position groups, none of them propped up by industry, all of them brutally repressed, a lot of them killed in prison cells and all this. It wasn't an ideology that the capitalists said, oh, wow.
Well, if you're vying to seize state power, you are going to run afoul with the state that exists. But that doesn't mean you're not being supported, whether openly or secretly, by ruling classes and by industrialists. You have to also remember the Weimar Republic had the veneer of being a democracy, which means it had to no-toe to an insurgent German working class, which it had to pretend it also equally served as a government. So I don't see how the fascists being repressed or put in jail is an example of the real forces of the German ruling class being against them.
The real forces being who?
The real ruling classes being against them. I don't see how that's an example of the ruling classes being against them.
You don't see how it's an example with the real ruling class being against them?
No.
That they're shut down everywhere, that they're scraping to get funds to get town halls and all of this. That should be.
What do you mean shut down everywhere? They are being persecuted in the way that communists are being persecuted and anarchists are being persecuted. Mm-hmm. And there's not really any much distinction because these are perceived anti-state actors. But behind the scenes, industrialists, and not only German industrialists, but international financial capitalists and industrialists are supporting these people.
after the 30s, they started putting money
No,
into it.
before
Yeah,
the
after the
30s.
30s. No, not before the 30s. There was not. It was largely built on membership.
So this will be an unavoidable dispute as to the actual historical facts at hand. Like, how can we debate if we do not agree about the actual historical facts at hand?
That's interesting. How do we do that? So I say that history shows us that that's not the case. It's not propped up by capitalism. And then we could see, so, okay, if you're just not going to accept that, and then let's go past that to the governments they did have. So if these were capitalist cronies or whatever, we can look at the systems they did create, and we see in both of these systems, they created something for the working people. It wasn't a profit-driven society. In fact, Adam Tooze, in his book, War of Destruction, says that during the period of 33 to 45, the German banks made less than they ever did in all of German history. So
right, but the return on the returns coming from Wall Street and the international banks were really high because of Germany's restarted its military-industrial complex, which was actually the source of its economic prosperity leading to the war. Like, it was a bet and it was a wager on that war. Hitler was telling the German people that it was all going to pay off because he was going to give them living space and Lebensraum. And the record of history shows whether Hitler was beneficial to working people or not. And he wasn't. He led them into a war, which led to the complete defeat of Germany and the division of Germany. So the record shows that he was not, in the long term, the champion of the German working classes.
Because he lost a war. He was a champion of the working class.
Because he swindled them with this fantasy and this delusion that he's going to enslave and conquer and annihilate the inferior Slavic races and all this bullshit, and that he would give them land to the east, and that this is they're going to have living room and so on and so on. This was a complete delusion, a complete swindle from the very beginning. Even before the war started, this was a false promise he was making. He was leading lamb to the slaughter.
So when we look at the German economy and we talk about workers, programs like Joy Through Strength, which we have not seen to this day, where workers were given subsidized holidays, things like the Volkswagen being created, the people's car at very cheap, radios being, vocational schools now being available to Germans, nationalized healthcare.
Right.
Nationalized
what is
education.
The fundamental source of the economic growth that's able to fund all of this? Is it a domestic revitalization of industry for the German people, in the German people's interest to lift Germany up? Or is it a arms manufacturing and weapons manufacturing a type of economy that is oriented toward invading other countries and engaging in war? You can only measure the success of such a country on the basis of benefiting its own people when the very source of the economic growth lies in unleashing the forces of production within. And no fascist government has ever been able to accomplish such a thing. All they can do is turn their economies into appendages of the military-industrial complex for purposes of invading other countries, because they're unwilling to engage in the necessary land reform within to actually give their people a slice of the pie. So they promise them they'll have pie from Ethiopia or from Poland or Eastern Europe.
Well, with Ethiopia, you're talking at the time of colonialism. So they viewed, misguided or not, it was that era that they viewed, as long as England and Britain.
Look, even by the standard of colonialism at the time, at the time that Italy invaded Ethiopia, colonialism was largely a vestigial system. The way in which Italy, the brutality with which Italy, the barbarism with which Italy randomly invaded Ethiopia, having zero continuity, zero historical claim, no business do whatsoever. It was a complete, it was a spectacle that was painted with blood and gore and violence. From where? Coming from where? And there had never been anything seen like that in the 1930s before, of just randomly invading a country, engaging in this brutal war. I mean, you saw things like this in the early 20th century and in the 19th century, but that era was on its way out by this time. So it's almost like Italy represented an attempt to preserve colonialism, the 19th century colonialism, and the 19th century liberal capitalism. The two were inexorably entwined when it was on its way out historically. It's almost like fascism was a reaction to the forces in march of history.
Actually, it didn't. And then the British and French powers chopped up the Middle East. So the colonialism did not end, or Italy wasn't the last thing of it. But
right, but after
once again, I don't like. I'm not defending.
Okay, so which country in the 1930s engaged in a comparable something comparable to Italy's invasion of Ethiopia?
Russia and Finland.
No, right. First of all, even if you think Russia invaded because it fabricated the violation of the treaty it had with Finland, it's not comparable. Because Russia at least Russia was lying about it and saying, oh, we're just doing it because they violated the treaty. But moreover, here's what's even worse. Even if you put this kind of formalistic argument aside, Russia was taking back territory lost after the Russian Civil War for purposes of protecting its borders, because the Finns were not going to work with the Soviet Union to prevent their country being used as a launching pad for the Germans. So they invaded Finland, not because they had some kind of adventuristic claim to Finland and, we're the Roman Empire, this is our conquerors. No, they invaded Finland to protect themselves, ultimately for the purposes of self-defense, because the Finnish government was secretly getting close with the Germans. So it's completely, and moreover, Finland is on the border of Russia. I mean, it's complete. It's nothing like Italy invading Ethiopia. There's no comparison.
Okay, it's an invasion, but okay, that's fine. Ethiopia wasn't a good move once again, so it's not even.
But I'm just trying to say, why is it that we don't see fascist countries that simply uplift their own people? Why must they engage in blanket aggression against others?
Well, they did uplift their own people.
I'm saying they don't just uplift their own people. Like China does now. For example, China doesn't invade anyone. China just uplifts its own people and focuses on internal development. The linchpin of China's economy does not rest upon ultimately reacquiring foreign colonies and randomly invading countries and getting more living space. China's economy is geared toward the development of the Chinese people. Why is it that and even the Soviet Union, during the Soviet Union's industrialization, the linchpin, the driving force of its economy lies in the development of the productive forces. It's not the linchpin of the economy is not some kind of gamble or gambit to reclaim some former lost colonial prestige or something like that.
Yeah, well, we're not in the age of colonialism outside of Western imperial colonialism. We're not in the age of that. So China has no need to do that. It would only hurt them in the end to do that today. But
right, and
they were very involved.
We're not in an age of colonialism per se, but we're still very much in an age of wars.
Yes,
and I don't see what context fascism has in the 21st century, except being the last resort of Western liberalism, ultimately, which may ultimately gear itself toward more wars of aggression against countries like Russia and China and others, which threaten the previous unipolar order. I think if fascism will emerge today, it will be in the form of resistance against the multipolar world order.
As far as what Nationalism?
No, as far as defending the current imperial status of Western Europe and America, which are on their way to losing this status.
But see, you were just saying that with World War II, that the liberals are losing their status, but the liberals are more powerful than ever with the fall of fascism. So it's not like that was their last
The thing
defense.
is that fascism was absorbed as the hired thug of the liberal order after World War II. And you can say that, oh, this was just the taking scientists, but it wasn't just taking scientists. The Nazi propagandists were taken. The Nazi ideologists were taken and absorbed. They were foundational for NATO. The Operation Gladio, the former fascists in Italy, were operationalized and mobilized by NATO. I mean, they were the hired thug of American imperialism during the Cold War. They were used as mercenaries in Africa and in other Cold War hotspots as anti-communist, fighters. So I don't see how.
And a lot of them were also killed, executed. So I don't see how that ties in with fascism when you take.
What do you mean executed? Like after Nuremberg trials, or what are you talking about?
Nuremberg trials and in Germany and stuff. Yeah. So so it's not like it's saying, hey, fascists, you protect liberalism. Come here.
I'll ask you a question. East and West Germany, which country had more sitting officials and government officials and judges and so on who were former high-ranking members of the Nazi Party?
I would assume West Germany.
Of course.
Yeah.
Well,
they didn't lock up. Yeah, they didn't lock up every single Nazi, but they did kill a lot. And it wasn't. So when you take about the philosophy of the belief of the ideology, it's anti-liberal. It's nothing that supports the liberal frame. Once again, this is why liberalism went to war with the authoritarian third position countries.
But the problem is that here's the issue. It wasn't liberalism that went to war. Liberalism was undergoing a profound transformation at this time. And the fascists claimed that they were against liberalism. But you have to ask, in what sense were they against liberalism? Was this against the essence of liberalism, the sacred individual of classical modernity, the individual rights, private property, free trade, all this kind of stuff? Were they against this specific liberalism, or were they only against the bad symptoms of liberalism, which was the widespread cultural breakdown, this, unemployment crisis, economic crisis? They were only against the bad aspects of liberalism, but at its essence, they were champions of liberalism. They were liberals like the Roman Empire was Roman. I mean, it was maybe no longer the Roman Republic, but it's still coming from the same foundation.
No, it's all foundations. They were against liberalism. They were collective society. They were against all of the Enlightenment philosophies.
Mussolini himself, I can give you a quote. Maybe you will say it's out of context, but I am open for you to give me the context. But he says that we are against the collectivistic state.
Central planning. He's against central planning.
It wasn't simply central planning. Let me pull it up right here. Yeah, here it is.
What year is this from?
I'll get the exact year in a second. Secondary. Okay, here we are. This was 1920, June 1921. Mussolini says, the state must have a police, a judiciary, an army, and a foreign policy. All other things, and I do not exclude secondary education, must go back to the private activity of individuals. If one wants to save the state, the collectivist state must be abolished. So he's not critiquing Bolshevism. He's critiquing the current Italian state for being too collectivistic. He's saying this state is too collectivistic. We have to privatize.
So from 1921, yeah. So before he's in power, anything else, when he was in power, they created the collectivist economy. They created the corporatist economy.
Well, it's
similar.
not true, because Mussolini did in fact privatize these various industries. The railways were privatized, insurance was privatized, all manner of industries and so on were given back to the industrialists in order to create a base of support among them. Now, I won't deny that in the 30s and later on, the state became a more kind of central organ to coordinate the interests of these various industrialists, but the state was still the hired thug of the Italian ruling class.
Okay, not at all. Once again, the state ruled over the industries. I'm just going to, since you brought up a quote, I'm just going to read a little bit from Mussolini's Italy here. The corporate state was also the quintessence of totalitarianism. By the end of 1933, with the framing of the new law on corporations to be promoted on 5th February 1934, an observer could no longer find any political, economic, or cultural activity which the party did not back, encourage, and control, directing to the farthest sectors of Italian life the hot breath of the fascist spirit. And it goes on and on about the different parts of the economy and how they put all the corporations into the corporate
Listen,
system.
this is good poetry, but it doesn't reflect the reality.
It's history.
What's the history?
It's history.
It doesn't reflect the reality.
History.
So, do you deny the privatizations I just mentioned that happened after Mussolini seized power?
So, third position is believe in class collaboration, much like what's going on in China today.
No.
Class collaboration.
Firstly, you can say class collaboration, this or that, but my question is more specific. Industries that were public before, publicly given a degree of public ownership before, in a state that was not a socialist state, it was a capitalist state, these were given to industrialists and privatized under Mussolini. What does that have to do with... I get it. They didn't want the Soviet model where
central planning and
they have central planning. I understand, but it's not just that, you know. And moreover, in the case of China rejects Soviet central planning, but China's special economy emerges from a strong foundation of an already existent national industrial system created by central planning, a unique relationship between the state and the economy that did not go away with central planning. And moreover, most decisively, here's really the linchpin, a land reform which gave Chinese people a piece of the pie. None of those things were the premise of fascism. Fascism simply took the old economy and created itself, the fascist party and the government, as a hired thug of one specific class in this economy.
It did not. It revamped the whole economy, and China.
Wait,
as
how
well.
How did it revamp the whole economy?
Well, shit, Germany. Let's go to land reforms. Let's go to the progressive tax they put on the rich, to where they're paying up to 39%, where workers are only paying up to 5% of taxes. I mean, this isn't something that's the rich wanted to happen there. In China as well, it wasn't central planning that led them to where they are. It's getting off central planning that led them to where they are.
No, it's both. Without the national industrial system created by central planning, which to this day serves as the very premise of socialism with Chinese characteristics, Deng Xiaoping did not revert to the order that existed before Soviet-style central planning. He took Soviet-style central planning as the very premise of his reforms, which means for example, the wealthy Chinese, I don't like to call them this, but let's say just call them capitalists, right? They were not the previous Chinese ruling class. They were peasants who, did well, and it was coming. There was already a complete social transformation that happened beforehand, and then Deng Xiaoping took this as the premise of his reforms. So it's a completely different situation.
Maybe a different situation, but it came out to the same result of corporatization of business, and then a mixture of private and state overseen government. I mean, that's literally what
But
corporatism was.
here's what you're not understanding this. The people who got rich in China, the businesses that emerged, every single company that has emerged in China after Deng Xiaoping's reforms has emerged, owes its existence to an already existing relationship between the state and the economy. Whereas in the case of Italy, all of these businesses and industries you're talking about existed before fascism.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the difference.
It's a difference, but the result is the same.
No, it's not. It's not the same, because in the case of China, they weren't simply putting a patch on a dead system and putting a Band-Aid on it. It was a completely new system that emerged after Deng Xiaoping's reforms, a completely new one.
Mm-hmm.
And in contrast to fascism, there is no aspect of economic life in China that is not somehow owing its premises and its existence to the state intervention into the economy.
Except everyone after Mao viewed that communalizing of agriculture and central planning as a huge mistake.
No, you're not listening.
No, I understand what you're saying. The starting point is that because China had the relation with the state in the economy, that they were building off that foundation, while
it's
the fascist
not
countries
it's
were
not
building
just
off
that
of the
either.
liberal
It's that China's economy is already premised by the state.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just that, we're not talking about the Mao era Soviet style industrialism or Mao's people's communes after the Great Leap Forward. Chinese theorists don't actually really dichotomize that from socialism with Chinese characters as much as they historicize it. Like, yes, this was necessary at the time to create the premises of a national industrial system. And then this stage was completed, and now we're in a different stage of socialist development. So they don't really say like one is better than the other as much as one is suited to a different time period than the other.
From everything I've seen, they've definitely said there was a failure in centralized. And I think Stalin realized this, and everyone realizes that it's too bureaucratic. You can't centrally plan from everything.
No.
So the third position's but let me
listen. That's not true. There was a debate toward the end of Mao's life and after Mao's death about the future of China's economy, and there was a debate about whether the current Soviet-style system can be preserved. But the question of its sweeping success in being able to provide a base level of industrialization, base level modernization, and so on and so on, the success of that was never disputed.
The success that it came from central planning.
Yeah, it was never disputed.
Yeah, it seems to be disputed from what I've been seeing. I'll refer you to this Chinese economist who spoke
I'm talking about the official Chinese Communist Party sources that they have, like the party's own sources. It's official.
Well, yeah, they're not going to badmouth Mao, just like Stalin wasn't going to badmouth Lenin or Marx or anyone else.
Deng Xiaoping was very open about saying he thought Mao was a 70-30 case. He was 30% bad and 70% good. So they're not afraid to critique Mao. They're not afraid to critique what they consider like the excesses of the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. They do that all the time.
But back to the state being the foundation, because they had that and they can build off of that. The third position, governments had to create that state because that state didn't exist. Like you said, it was a liberal state that existed.
Right, but
so they had to manifest that state into reality without having everything the Bolsheviks and the Chinese went through with the mass revolutions, famines, and all of these things.
So as a matter of fact, they created no such state. The state that you're talking about was the cherry on top of a existing economy and existing system. It was a cherry on top. In the case of Russia and China, they actually did build a state from scratch, and moreover lay the foundations of a modern state from scratch. They built all the institutions from scratch, more or less. They were completely engaged in a leveling of the economy in order to establish a newfound relationship between the state and the economy. And this never happened in the fascist countries. Now, of course, famines and all these things happened in China and the Soviet Union, but that's because they had to create an independent basis for the modernization, for industrialization and modernization. And when you're not, pillaging countries in Africa and foreign countries for your resources to get the necessary surpluses of production to engage in industrialization, you have to modernize agriculture so that the surpluses of both labor and agricultural produce can go toward industrialization. That's why China and the Soviet Union weren't out here in living space and colonizing and invading other people. And the other alternative, of course, is
They never needed. Yeah.
taking advantage of the differentials in the concentration of capital that are already established. So getting foreign investments from America and Britain and other international capitalists, which they weren't able to do. So what happened was unavoidable.
Who wasn't able to do? Oh, you're talking about
China. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, the famines. And there's people that argue it's because of essential planning that some of those famines were induced. But as far as the cherry on top of the state, it was not a cherry on top of the state. It was a revamping of state itself. So in liberalism, we have a weak state, right? Just like we do today. It's strong, I get it, but it's a weak state. There's no foundation to it. There's no component of it that creates and keeps national. So, sure. But they created these things. So I think we're getting lost in the weeds of like, oh, is this a state or a cherry on top? Did they do something? It's
so I'll ask you a question. Oftentimes, a state, actually not oftentimes, the way a state cements a material foundation for its existence is land reform. It distributes parcels of land or some other kind of thing to the people so that a new kind of social contract emerges. The people's way of life becomes inexorably tied to the state. This is true not even just for capitalism, for all history, right? Going back even to the Greeks and whatever you want, the Ottomans, whatever you want. This is how states acquire material foundation. How did fascist Italy and Germany acquire a material foundation for their state?
Well, through land reform as well.
Which land reform are you referring to?
Agriculture and industry as well. The same thing.
No. Let's not brush over this topic. It's important. Mm-hmm. Which land reforms were implemented in Italy and Germany, respectively?
So they had collective farming in Germany. It wasn't communal, but it was collective. It was all under an agency that would plan essentially what needed to be produced. They had land beautification projects where they would go have youth help build up farms so they could have more people growing in those farms working without putting any money in through the state or anything, or the peasants' money into it, because they had these programs that would go there and beautify the land and build them up and do that. And same with Italy. They a part of the function of the corporatist system that was very good, I think, is they're able to take work and transport workers, thousands of workers to towns, to build those towns up, to aggregate the land, and then move on to the next one and try to build that up as well. So they were doing.
What you're saying is not true. The furthest extent of Germany's land reform was changes in the laws about the inheritance of farmland existing for the existing peasants. As far as Italy is concerned, I'm not aware of any major redistribution of land or division of landed estates in Italy at all.
They didn't redistribute land. Yeah, they didn't.
Well, that's what land reform means. Land reform means you give people land who didn't have land before.
Yeah, no, the people already had. So that's another thing. There wasn't this homelessness or people without land as there was under the czars in Russia and whatever was going on in China before Mao. So it's a totally different landscape. You're talking, even though Italy was not industrialized, it had no need to make communal farms and to give land. I mean, you say they give land to them, but they're communal farms.
I'm not talking about communal farms. Communal farms, for example. So during the Russian land reform, after the Bolsheviks seized power, the Stolypin reforms under the Tsar were reversed, and land was given to peasants. It was their land. They owned it. as opposed to the landowners, the nobility. They took it from the nobility, gave it to the peasants. Then a decade later, the collectivization began of the creation of the kolkhozes preceded that. The widespread establishment of the kolkhozes started a decade later. So those are two different things, okay? The first thing did not happen in Italy or Germany. There was no land reform, and there was no equivalent to a land reform where the people were actually being given some kind of interest in the state, in the economy. They were not given any kind of piece of the pie. They weren't given any, how should I say? What's the word? They weren't given a security. Is that the word? They weren't given anything like that.
They had that because they could own private property. The citizen
They could, but what property did they end up owning?
Whatever plot they lived on. I mean,
but the majority of German, this is not true for majority of German people. They had nothing.
They had nothing at the time of Weimar, yes, but that quickly started changing after Weimar, and when
they were being promised that they would be given land after it was stolen from the inferior Slavic peoples, quoting the Nazis. Mm-hmm. That's what it all was about. They're saying, "Oh, we'll give you land, but it's going to be to the east. Mm-hmm. It's not going to be in Germany because we don't want to upset the land, the Junkers and the monopolists that are here. So we'll promise you this land elsewhere." That's what happened.
No, what happened was, it wasn't because of the Junkers. What happened was they didn't believe, right or not, they didn't believe that there was enough land there to have that kind of reform.
There was. There actually was.
That's fine. I'm just saying what's like.
It's cynical. Why? Of course, they understand there's enough land. They just don't want to. They just want to serve the interests of the existing monopolists and landed proprietors. And that's that. It's not that they were just mistaken and we did incorrect measurements or something. No, they knew. They just wanted to serve the interests of the German ruling classes, while at the same time keeping the interests of the German people at bay in the form of whipping them into a frenzy for war.
That's such a simplification of that. That's such a gross simplification of that. It's not about whipping the Germans into frenzy. It wasn't just this narrative of it's just a war economy. All they're expecting is war. That's all the Germans were promised was war. It was none of that. They built the workers up themselves. They were living. Once again, when we talk about
the reason there was a rise in the German economy is almost entirely attributable to repropping up the military-industrial complex. It is almost all of the economic gains in Germany are almost all, if not all, blank point and period, attributed to that fact. It was because they were making just like, for example, if you build infrastructure in your country, it's a debt, right? You're pouring a lot of investment, but that creates jobs. It creates capital. It creates some kind of life for the economy. And this is what the Germans were doing for the arms industry and the military-industrial complex. So yes, it was a war economy. It was all geared towards war.
It was not geared toward. It was geared towards building Germany up as well. Not just towards. But so hold on. Let's not brush past this, though. Let's not brush past this. So we're talking about, when we talk about nationalized healthcare, nationalized education, worker retreats. We're talking about, these aren't things where you're like, we're just going to please these big capitalists. When you're talking about taxing the capitalists more than anyone else, a progressive tax. When we're talking about this, it is not serving the elite. This is not this narrative being painted as like Hitler would serve.
So let's be clear about this. Is it serving the individual interests of each and every one of these elites? Of course not. But the question is it serving their collective interests? And I would say yes, it is, because they were unwilling to engage in a social confrontation at home. Of course, they recognized the need. I mean, listen, they were very open about this. Like, listen, you German capitalists, if you don't listen to us, the workers led by the Bolsheviks or whatever are going to come and get your ass. So you better listen to us because we're saving you. That was what they were telling them. You
If you
know,
don't listen to us, you're going to face our boot. That's what happened when they came
no,
into
but
power.
primarily they were saying it's either us or the Asiatic Bolshevism. You make
Yeah, it's
your
a good
pick.
sales pitch. It's a good sales pitch.
Of course,
Yeah.
it is, and it was also arguably true.
It's not. That's the thing, though. It's not arguably true.
Yeah.
When you put industry under the boot of the state, at the heel of the state, well, and I'll go back to China. It's the same thing China evolved to. They eventually came to this understanding that you have to have this mixture, but you have to have a strong state.
So why doesn't China need? Why isn't the linchpin of China's economy a war economy? Why does it successfully engage in the internal development of China and the Chinese people?
Because they joined the World Trade Organization and they've been skyrocketing since then. They're building up a military. Don't doubt that they aren't. They're building up a strong military.
Yeah, but that's not the linchpin of their economy whatsoever.
The World Trade Organization is. That's the linchpin.
No, the World Trade Organization is not the linchpin, and neither is the military. It's China's infrastructure, which is built on the basis of debt that is later paid off in the long term. And its construction, infrastructure, those are the things that are the real linchpin of the Chinese economy. Yeah,
it was opening up to foreign investment. Is the linchpin was driving China.
Okay, let's be clear. Opening up to foreign investment is what allowed for the transfers, very rapid transfers, and the concentration of capital to take place and to build up Chinese industry. So yes, that was an important premise. But as far as the linchpin of what drives China's economy, it's not enough to have foreign investment. You can have money, but what are you going to do with that money? It's capitalism 101, right? The linchpin of China's economy lies in a combination, especially in the Xi era, of infrastructure, construction, and debt-based works. Instead of just taking out debt, they do something with it. Its economy is based not in abstraction, financial abstraction, but in building real things, real intangible things, which eventually pay for themselves. So that's the actual linchpin of the Chinese economy. Now, the reason the Chinese economy is different from fascism is because, again, all of those businesses and industries which emerged in China, they owe their existence to China's socialist system. The industries that exist under fascism existed before some kind of the fascists took over. Fascism merely inherited the class antagonism of liberalism, and it merely displaced the coordinates of being able to wage this class struggle. But in the case of China,
what do you mean coordinates?
For example, it's displaced the ability for the class struggle to be waged as it had before.
Yes.
Yeah.
We don't agree with having our classes fight each other. That's, once again, class collaboration. But no, so China...
But it's still... But hold on, I will insist on something. Mm-hmm. You notice the key word is displace. It still had to displace the class struggle. It didn't just get rid of it because they don't agree with it. They had to displace it onto foreign adventures and foreign wars. That's the important thing.
Before the foreign adventures and foreign wars, right?
Yeah.
Before then, but from 33 to 38, they were doing that. They got rid of the class antagonism. They nationalized the people.
Listen.
The classes were brought together. Once again, if your health care is paid for, if you're educated, you're a worker and you can't afford to go to the best university, and now you start getting rid of some of these antagonisms between the classes. Because
Italy invaded Ethiopia in 35, so it's not like 30. What do you say, 33 to 38?
I'm talking about Germany.
Yeah. Oh, okay, you're talking about Germany. Okay, yeah. Well, here's what I'm trying to say, though. I agree. The general standard of living for Germans, including German workers, rose during this period you're talking about. But the only reason it did is because it was a bet. It was a gambit. And that was based in the military-industrial complex. You cannot say the class struggle has been eliminated until this bet you're making, it proves itself, proves its outcome, because the outcome is not proven yet. So it's a wager.
We never get to see the outcome.
It's not that the class struggle was eliminated. It's that it lied in waiting. We were going to see if Hitler's promises pay off or not. And they obviously didn't.
Yeah. Well, I think this is another misnomer, but this will be, I don't even know how to argue this, that if Germany did not go to war, it would crumble. I think that's a total misnomer, because as they were building up their infrastructure and their industry, as they were back in, work.
Yeah, had
or
Germany
economy
not
for
gone
work.
to war, the German state would have been overthrown. Absolutely. There is
Yeah,
no doubt about that.
I said it would have been stronger than ever. But so you started this off
But
saying,
hold on. Why is there not a single example of a fascist state that doesn't have to go to war? There's not a single example in history.
there's only been like technically two, and they were wrapped up in World War
But
II
why is that?
and destroyed. Because it is something they, anytime there's anything authoritarian that pops up in any other country, they become the enemy of liberal democracy.
Sure,
So
but they're not
whether you call something fascist or third position or collective but national, idealistic, whatever you call it, when it pops up in any other country, it's either going to go on the list of evil or it's going to be subverted and taken down and destroyed.
When countries resist the American created global system, yes, they are. I agree. But my wider point, I basically break it down like this. Let's just use common sense.
Right.
Now, on paper, what the fascists say, or what fascists today will say, doesn't sound so bad, right? Oh, it's just like China. When they say, for example, let's have class collaboration. We're for private property. We're not like the communists want to eliminate it. But the kicker is there is a specific ruling class in power now, like specific faces, right? Specific companies, specific businesses. And these people have an identifiable interest. These are the people in power now, is what I'm talking about, right?
In China, are you talking about?
No, in the West.
Okay.
It's not an abstraction of the capitalist class. These are people in power, right?
Mm-hmm.
What you are saying is you are saying that you are not going to pose a threat to them and their interests. You're not going to seize their assets, their property, and redistribute it. You're not going to create a land reform. You're not going to unleash the productive forces and outmode the monopolies that exist now. You're going to work with them. Now, capitalists in the abstract doesn't sound bad, but there are capitalists, the real capitalists that exist now are not abstract, and they have an identifiable interest. The reason there's only been two fascist countries or whatever you're talking about is because if you have enough power to overthrow the state and to seize power, okay, and you're doing this in a way that implies the fundamental transformation of society and the economy or whatever, and the overthrow of the powers that be, you may as well be a communist and just have land reform. Why not? Like, why must you serve the same ruling classes that prop up the current order you claim to be against? And the answer to this is, I don't think this is the case for you. I think you genuinely do. People like you who call themselves fascists, you genuinely do have anti-establishment sentiment. However much I disagree with it, with its form, you still have that, right? But real fascists historically did not have this. They worked with the status quo, with the establishment, with the capitalists that did exist at the time. And that's why that is the whole basis of their doctrinaire differences with Marx. Like in abstract, it's not so that, okay, you're not against private property, you're not against a capitalist. That's fine. But what does that mean concretely as far as the existing situation is concerned? And historically, it meant fascists were the hired thugs of a decaying establishment. That's why you will notice the continuity. The only real examples of continuity with those two fascist governments we can find where there's like legit connections are, for example, right-wing dictatorships in South America, in Africa, in Asia, and elsewhere. In today's Ukraine, with Ukraine today, you find examples of real continuity with historical fascism, and it's all the same thing. It's always the bankrupt ruling class, the establishment, now led by American imperialism, safeguarding and defending its interests from certain collapse.
So That's not the reality, though, of Italy under the corporate state or Germany. It's not working with capitalist or industry, let's say, in industrial capitalist, right? Let's stay specific on that, because the finance capitalist wasn't even there, because they had to adhere to Hitler. They had to adhere to the state. Whatever he said, I want done, they had to do. So there is no speaking. There is no we're working together. There is you're working for the state, and this is what we need to be done.
Right.
So,
but the question is,
before we get into Q&A, because we got off on all this. So you said like there's no like for 21st century fascism. What does it even mean? It's not around. What does communism mean in the 21st century, would you say?
Well, that's a good question. I think in America and in the West, unfortunately, because of the influence of America and American universities, communism has come to mean something entirely different than what it means for the world, most of the world currently, that is outside of the West. But today, I think I could broadly say that communism more or less means learning from the example of China. Communism means today a fundamental hole, a gap in our history that needs to be confronted. In addition to the present state of things and current affairs, you have the whole former Soviet bloc, Eastern Europe. They have not reconciled with their past. It remains unfinished history. And this is true for elsewhere. So today, communism is an open question. It's the difference with fascism, I think. There is no... communism is an opportunity to engage in a real social question, in a real question of our common economic reality, without having to make any commitments to any existing private established interest. And for that reason alone, today in the 21st century, communism must mean a completely anti-establishment position. Now, granted, most Americanized communists, this is not just true for America. Now, because of American influence, it's spreading to Western Europe. They serve American imperialism, the American establishment, and the respective establishments of their countries. No doubt about that. But
so if communism is once again, it's hard to find any real communist that's not a liberal, right? That's kind of what it's been reduced to in America.
Yeah. But if you engage with Chinese communists,
that's the reality, though, Haas. If that's the reality,
right? But only in the West.
What separates people like you and myself? If we're both anti-establishment, if we're both collectivists, if we're both nationalists,
we have a differing view of history.
That's it. What does that mean today, though? What does that mean today?
No,
should we fight about? Oh, I read.
No. Listen. I don't think we should be political enemies. I don't consider you a political enemy, but I have ideological, historical disagreement with you.
Do you think the worker cares about that? If materialism or anti-materialism puts food on the table?
No. But I still think this is about what will ultimately prove to be most successful in creating an authentic anti-establishment movement.
So have you seen the platform that myself and other people are going to be running on in a few years? New Frontier.
Have
you seen the platform?
No, I haven't. Granted, I haven't. But look, I'm a Marxist-Leninist. I have seen dozens of good platforms from.
Oh, I know, but people actually like going to run on, like, it's not a platform.
No, I understand. I've seen Marxist-Leninists who are running on great platforms, but ultimately, politics has a material reality, and it's not voluntary. It's based in concrete material realities. So to me, for example, I look at phenomena like the People's Party, third-party initiatives that I think are grounded in current reality. And I think this is the site of the future. I think both Bernie Sanders, a third party in America. Yeah.
I disagree with that. I think third parties in this country are impossible. Werner Sombart wrote this book in early 1900s, Why There Is No Socialism in the United States. And part of it was how it's impossible to get a socialist movement. It's impossible to have a third party in America just because of how it's set up. So I say vehicles exist that we could still use. Democrat, Republican, doesn't matter if you're that or not, but that vehicle's there. And one benefit to our country, and a hindrance as well, is a personality or a person can bring forth a whole new idea. Bernie Sanders, he's a parliamentary socialist. Fine. I don't view him as like a real fighter for socialism, but you see the energy behind him. And someone like Trump, he wasn't a true populist, but you saw that early energy behind him.
But
so you see there's a crowd there.
The issue is that America's two-party system has not always existed. There has been shifts historically that change,
but not for a long time, right? Not in any of our lifetimes.
I am seeing now, with a fundamental political realignment that's happening in this country, now is the time that the two-party system is going to break down. And I don't know how it's going to break down, but there's too much a contradiction of interests within both parties for the current setup to be sustained. So
I guess time will tell. I mean, so do you wait for that to fall apart, or do you take action to try to get your voice out there?
Well, I argue with, again, I'm a Marxist-Leninist, so you can imagine how many times I have to argue with Marxist-Leninist voluntarists who tell me, why don't you not take action and all this kind of stuff? And I'll tell them the same thing. It's not simply that I'm waiting. It's that I'm trying to, first and foremost, have a clear grasp of reality. Establish a clear grasp of reality, scientific grasp of reality.
Is everything historical materialism? Are you going to gauge everything through those lenses, or?
No, it's not just a matter of contemplation, but you do need to have a clear understanding of the current situation to know precisely where to intervene. So I talk about the People's Party. I talk about third parties. Ultimately, what can I do but talk to my audience? Like, I cannot, what am I going to do? Run outside and, I've been critiqued, but they say, why don't you go march with red flags and a Mao hat or something outside? Why? It's all information anyway. It's all this stuff is information. It's media. It's to broadcast yourself to others in some kind of way. And I'm doing that in a way more effective way than LARPing in the street could ever possibly accomplished. So
what would it, I guess I'm confused. I understand what you're saying, but I do view like political action. Like there has to come a time where you put your politics out there.
This is why we Stalinists, we Marxist-Leninists, we say fascists and the ultra-leftists are two sides of the same coin. You both have the same voluntaristic, almost anarchistic view of political action.
What do you mean by that?
This idea that there is some kind of voluntary political act we do as individuals that is decisive. And the truth is that politics is something super individual. It's concrete, and there is no real one political action. Politics is a combination of information, media, and organization. The rest,
action.
No. The actions that happen, like for example, storming the Winter Palace, these are incidental after effects. The only site at which a political actor can intervene is information and organization, almost the organization thereof. But as far as action is concerned, you have no control over that. People will act as they act. There's no way to control that. People act as they act. What is really, for example, let me ask you, in this day and age, what is a political action? In this day and age, what would be a political action?
I would say taking your policies to the people and putting it on the public stage.
That's information.
Yeah, more than information, because like you said, we can do information online and spread information like that. This is when you're talking to the people, you're bringing them to you. You're bringing them to an idea. You're bringing them to support that.
What difference does it make if you do that online or in person?
Because in person, it's going to have more effect than online. Online, look, you had to shut your stream down because I showed a book cover, right? It's like that's where we're at online now. It's
but here's the thing. Online is how you have to begin. I agree. Eventually, there comes to a point where people need to be on the ground with communities and talking to people. but you have to begin online, because if you begin, let's say, in this or that community, how will the word spread that you even exist? You're just going to be stuck in that local context.
So, but see, it's more than just like local organizing, right? Because people have done this. I mean, the same old methods have been done over and over to death and have gotten nowhere. So how do you reach those people? So hypothetically, if I run for a Democratic Congress spot, and then I can get on some radio shows, I can finally get on stage for debate. And then, oh my God, he's oh my God, I can't believe it. And it's not like we're running as fascists, but my history, all, the videos I made, all that will come back, right? So you get attention like that by putting yourself out there, putting the message out there, taking that risk, casting
that all of that is media. All of what you just mentioned is media and information. It's the only reason why would you have to run on the Democrat Party and not a third party? Because if you run as a Democrat, you'll get more attention.
Yeah, and it's harder to get a third party off the ground. You have to have a certain amount of signatures and all this.
No, I'm just trying to say political action is a combination of information and organization. There is no mythical act you do as far as politics is concerned. We have Maoists. I don't know what you mean by we have Maoists here on the left, unfortunately, which I am a part. We have Maoists who march on the streets with flags, and they have the quotations, and they're dressing up, and they really believe they're engaging in a political action. But what they're doing is engaging in a certain information broadcast of making themselves look foolish, right? But they think this is the real political action we're taking to the streets, and there's no such action entailed in this.
Yeah, it's LARPing for the most part. Yeah, playing dress up and But see, that's what I'm saying. That's not the political action. That's wasted. Been there, done that. Everyone's still kind of doing that method. I think the third party goes out that way too. That's why I think, once again, we're in a country where personalities or single people can push forth a whole idea. So to me, it seems...
Well, which personality would you have in mind to be pushing this idea?
I'm just saying personalities, period. That's AOC, Ilhar Oman. Why do these people become known names now? Because they came with this personality, put this message out there that they don't follow through with, but still put this message out there and got support from that.
Well, I think the great
American can do that.
The great revolutionaries and leaders in history. I agree. In a populist movement, there will be strong personalities inevitably. But the authentic revolutionaries of history, they had hidden personalities. They had pseudonyms. They were just known implicitly. And it wasn't the force of their personality, but the force of their ideas that spread. It wasn't just the force of their ideas either. It was the force of their effectiveness in organizing, their effectiveness in operationalizing their parties and their movements. And
so, and that can't be done with people running on, the Democratic platform.
Absolutely not.
Bernie Sanders and Trump did that just
you're
like
right. That. And here's my question to you: what happened to them?
Well, Bernie obviously cucked out for the DNC.
Well, listen,
Trump was a rhino.
I agree. Bernie did cuck out, but Bernie had two options: leave the Democratic Party or start a third party.
He could have raised the ruckus. He could. He didn't have to support Hillary.
It would be like a form of wrecking of his part, which I would have supported.
Well, yeah. I mean, if he's a socialist,
but it would have ultimately led to his ejection and his force to form the third party. We know now. I mean, look at AOC. What happened to her?
What do you mean?
What happened to AOC? There was a Justice Democrats. I was following them. I supported them. They put AOC in power. And there was this whole idea, we're going to take over the Democratic Party. What happened? I mean, she sold out.
Played ball with Nancy Pelosi.
These parties themselves have a corrupting influence. Trump.
But you thought they were real, though? You thought AOC was a real socialist revolutionary?
No, I didn't think she was a revolutionary, but I did think she was going to be part of a populist wave that was going to take over the Democrats because she was part of the Justice Democrats. And it was a different situation back then in 2017, 2018. It was a totally different. It's not like how it is now. It sounds absurd now, but it made sense back then.
Oh, just like
Um,
Trump did to a lot of people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Trump promised people he was gonna be against the wars, and he was gonna put America first, and he was gonna, have infrastructure and bring all the jobs. But he made all these promises, and what happened? He had to capitulate to the Republican establishment.
We allow ourselves to be ruled by politicians, though. So AOC was always a politician, right? She come out.
Well, that's the thing. No one knew who she was. She was just somebody that the Justice Democrats propped up. She said she was a working class woman from the Bronx, and that's how I viewed her as well at the time. I didn't see her history in politics or anything. And then what do you know? It turns out that being in the Democratic Party, because look, if you're in a party in the Democratic or Republican Party, you will have to make sacrifices for the collective well-being of the party as a whole. And
not if you reject the parties, not if you truly are revolutionary and you're anti-system.
Then you're going to get kicked out, or you're going to get completely blocked.
Doesn't that still do so? Say worst case scenario, you get kicked out and shamed and all this. Don't you think people are going to be attracted to that because they saw someone who was really anti-system, like putting himself out there?
But the thing is that these parties are now rigged to make it so that people can't even get to that point. They'll rig it against you, so you won't even have you won't even be able to look. Because look, if you want to rise in these parties, you have to use their resources. If you want to use their resources to become more prominent than you are, then you have to bow down to the parties.
Yeah, you can't use their once again, if it's anti-system and revolutionary, you're not using their resources.
Here's a question I have for you. What happens in a few years or whenever, when the two-party system breaks down by itself? Wouldn't you think it was short-sighted for you not to see that?
Hey, you know what? I'm 43 fucking years old. I'm growing old waiting for that to happen. So I'm running short on patience of waiting for that to happen. I don't think it's going to happen.
It's going to happen because there's never before in American history, except during periods of new parties emerging into prominence, has there been such a profound political realignment in regards to the formal parties that exist. Like, we have a Republican and Democratic Party, but they are so fundamentally divided. And there's so many different rivaling interests within those parties. What meaningfully unites them now?
The Republicans and Democrats?
Yeah, respectively. What meaningfully unites them?
Foreign wars?
Biden pulled out of Afghanistan, and he was being attacked from the left in his party for doing that because it was like...
For how he did it. That's how they're...
Yeah, he was being attacked from the left and from the right and all over.
I think he's bombing in Somalia. I think he even did bombings in Somalia. Yeah. So he moved. They always agree on the things that are worst for us. Essentially, that's usually banker bailouts, foreign wars, stuff like that. So usually, when I see Republicans and Democrats agreeing, I know it's going to be bad for us. Pretty much.
Yeah. But I'm just trying to say is that.
So what if that doesn't happen, though? What if you're getting older?
Well, here's the issue. There was a populist wave in 2016.
Yeah.
With Bernie and Trump. The parties that was a virus within both parties. Both parties got the vaccine against this virus. So what now?
Now it's time for real people outside of Bernie and Trump to step up and take revolutionary ideas.
But you're not going to do it.
It has to come from the working class. It has to come from the working class. We can't rely on intellectuals. We can't keep relying on these same people that fail us over and over.
I agree, but it's not going to come from the parties.
See, I think you need to use the vehicle. Maybe, okay, we disagree on this, but I think you need to use the vehicles that exist. I don't think a third party is an option. And if the only way it's an option is you're waiting for this state to wither away amongst itself with each other, that to me, that's just waiting on a miracle, waiting on something that might not come in our lifetimes. So,
and for the record, a lot of people saying red, brown, whatever. Listen, that's a question of ideology. That's a question of our view of history. Concretely speaking, there are not any communists and there are not any fascists yet in America. That's my view. You have populists and you have establishment people, and the populists have different ideas amongst themselves. Some ideas I oppose and will argue against, but let's not
Do you
get
guys
carried
think
away.
it helps either of your causes to fall under either one of those labels with communism or fascism?
I honestly, now that I understand what like I'm doing, what the risk I'm going to take and all that, I really wish these terms would just disappear, because they do nothing but people stuck in their dogmatism to where it's like, I'm a this, I'm a this, I'm a
Like
this.
ask people to relearn what they
So
mean almost.
I wish I would have just spoke about the beliefs
Mhm.
instead of like promoting a history and all of this, because it really gets in the way with speaking with people, because that term, and it's like, I can't be associated with that term. I'm sure with Haas too, people say, oh, he's a communist, I can't be associated with that term. So those terms, which are in the past, are still dividing us today, to where you say red brown alliance. If you have people that are collective, that are national, and that want a better future for their country and are anti-liberal, they should be figuring out ways, how do we manifest this into reality? What do we do? But instead, you'll see on Haas's side, whole bunch of little cliques fighting each other. Then you'll see on the other side, same thing, whole bunch of little cliques online fighting each other over these terms and titles and that. So
Well,
these terms, I think, just get in the way of anything productive.
so for me, I think there is a lasting significance, decisive significance for Marxism Leninism. But I think Marxist Leninists in the West are Cartesians. And what that means is that they think that Marxism Leninism itself creates its own object, when in fact, the object has always been something that preceded us. So in Russia, Russia had a populist movement, a revolutionary movement. Lenin came and said, we Marxists will be the best leaders, and the only way this movement that already existed will succeed. Just like how in America, the object is the populist, anti-establishment forces. And when I say I'm a Marxist Leninist, I'm not saying I want everyone to agree with me ideologically. I'm saying that I believe we Marxist Leninists have the most to offer to see to the ultimate victory of American popular interests and the interests of the American people, and the anti-establishment interests generally. Whether you want to look at that from the perspective of like, Occupy, or you know, the populisms of 2016, it's all the same. There is an objective. See, the point of Marxism has always been there's an objective class struggle. It's not a subjective struggle. It's not the struggle between Marxism and foreign ideologies. It's a class struggle. And Marxism is supposed to be a tool that is best equipped to serve the working class and then ultimately serve the people as a whole. So the aim and the object to me is objective. It's not ideological or subjective.
So we're going to get to some of these questions because we have a lot. And some of these names, there's no way I'm going to be able to pronounce them, but I'll give it a try. Okay, so from Zoltan, said, so Welsherman, Eugen, During. Does that sound?
Can you bring the questions up?
No, they're too far back. Welchmers, Eugen, During. WELTSCHMERZ, Eugen During, I think that's what it is, accuses Marxism of being utopian because it's based on destruction, like Oswald Spengler in Prussian socialism. Thoughts from CT and then Haas.
Well, I've always argued Marx was great at criticism, bad at solutions. So that's been my belief.
I actually think the destruction relevant to Marx and Marxism has happened multiple times. You had the crisis in 1929. You had the crisis in 73. All of these. I think what to me is so advanced about Chinese Marxism is it allows you to take a more cyclical view of this cycle of destruction and rebirth. So I don't think it's a utopian eschatological vision of a final destruction. Systemic breakdowns and social revolutions should be viewed almost like K waves, like the contratia of whatever cycles, if you know what that is. They should be viewed as waves, not eschatologically.
Okay. Again, from Zoltan. I know Czechoslovakia, God, I hate this. Specifically Czech land, you had a pretty strong group that wanted to unify with Germany, led by Alfred Brunner, an early Nazi theorist in the German Socialist Party. I don't know if that doesn't sound like a question, huh?
I think he's just making a comment in
All right.
Czechoslovakia.
So from Sun State, fascism is capitalism in decay. Don't show that fascist book on my capitalist platform, they'll ban me. Okay. Neon Nor has Sultan already proved the USSR was funded by Western capital the entire time. No communist has been able to debunk him. I think you're muted.
You're muted.
Oh, can I briefly address both of those things?
Sure.
Yeah, the first thing about this business of being on a capitalist platform, I'm sure you want me to be just like an anonymous loser like you who doesn't make a difference whatsoever, but that's not going to be the case. I don't know what the difference between a capitalist or social. I guess you're saying what? We're not in power yet, so we can't seek power. What a stupid thing to say. The second thing you just said, that the Soviet Union was funded by capitalists, is an abject fucking lie. The lie comes from Sutton's work about Wall Street financed the Bolshevik Revolution, which is a complete fabrication. Wall Street, in fact, we know, financed at first the Kerensky government, but would go on to later finance the white counter-revolution during the Russian Civil War. The Bolsheviks had no foreign support at that time. So
that's actually one of the next questions from Sun State says, what does Haas think about the Bolsheviks being funded by American banks and the German government at the time?
There was no funding by the American banks. It's a complete fabrication. Again, the only source that they can give us is Sutton's work, which is bullshit. It's not. It hasn't. If you look at the primary sources, he has nothing. It's only rumors and hearsay about Trotsky was in New York and met with someone and whatever. And even if that was true, we all know that Trotsky was never himself a Bolshevik. So
yeah, and Trotsky admitted too that he got financial aid.
I mean, the only thing we know historically is that Germany sent Lenin on that train because, Germany had an interest to do that. But that wasn't German capitalists. That was the German government, which was engaged in war against the Russian Empire at the time. So it's not much of a conspiracy,
I think Sutton, at least, he was speaking about Olaf Oshberg, who was a J.P. Morgan agent, who was the first general manager of the Roscom Bank. I think that's where they tie in those accusations.
But there's no connection. There's no actual verifiable connection. When in fact we can verify the connection between international financiers and industrialists and capitalists to the white counter-revolution. So, I mean, it's really on the surface. Like, if the Bolsheviks were being supported by Wall Street, why did every major power on planet Earth invade Russia to prop up the white counter-revolution? It doesn't make any sense.
From Pasho Zero, CT seems uneducated on all of the historical events he's evoked thus far. My only question is what he thinks about the labor aristocracy.
The what?
The labor aristocracy.
I have no idea.
All right, I'll move on. From Sun State, morally championing the two greatest historical champions of colonialism, Britain and France, against Germany. That's interesting. LOL. Okay.
Well, that's where this falls apart. The biggest capitalist power.
To be clear, no one forced Germany to invade the USSR in 1941. The USSR entered into an alliance with England and America because they had the Germans as their common enemy. As soon as the war ended, you can see they had nothing in common beyond that. And yet again, that's the question, why did Germany have to invade the USSR? I mean, so the USSR should have allowed itself to be conquered by... had the USSR dogpiled on in, maybe your argument would have merit, but that's not what happened. The USSR minded its own business, and it just was in a way that was unprovoked, was invaded by Germany. So,
you know what Hitler thought What happened? He thought the Western powers would stop the war on him and view the Bolsheviks as the bigger power. He's such an Anglophile that he thought that would come as a result of that. And obviously, it didn't play out like that at all.
Okay. From Zoltan, he said, Germans should have blitzed the Anglos harder. Okay. From Jimbo DDD. Haas, what's your opinion on the U.S. lend-lease to the Soviet Union? They gave the Soviets 14,000 planes and 13,000 tanks, as well as 2.7 tons of petrol.
Yeah, this is a common historical myth that has routinely been debunked. The Lend-Lease overwhelmingly benefited Britain. The Soviet Union got breadcrumbs in comparison that were nowhere near decisive compared to Soviet domestic industry. I think that maybe the Soviets did make use of American Jeeps and the most of all the Jeeps that they used those, but as far as planes and tanks were concerned, nope, the bulk of that was Soviet domestic made. Whatever the Americans provided was not decisive at all. So,
okay. From the Sun State, Germany wasn't practicing self-defense, knowing all the world's capitalist and communist powers were set against them.
Well, what evidence did the Germans have that the USSR was going to invade Germany? There was no such evidence. Hitler was very. I mean, look, this would be a debate if it wasn't literally all out in the open. That Hitler believed that the Germans had the right to conquer the so-called inferior Slavic races, and that these were subhuman people, and that. Yeah, I mean, like, it's so plain, like, I don't know what to say. I mean, I guess I would just say read what Hitler himself said and spoke about in speeches.
From Neon Nora, why did China change their constitution to allow BlackRock to take over their mutual fund biz?
I don't know what you're talking about specifically. But that stands that all land in China is owned by the government, whether that's the central government or local governments. All land is owned by the government. So that's China's real estate policy at its foundation.
From Zoltan, he said, just bring up Otto Ernst Remar, a Nazi being funded by the USSR in West Germany. He also sold arms to Castro and was an advisor to Nasser. Okay. From Punished Italian, we are waiting time on history, which will always be a stalemate. Talk about the actual ideas, corporatism and nationalism as effective socialism. Okay. From Tyler Durden, for both, are communism and fascism democratic? How is leadership determined?
So I'll just answer for my sake. Communists ultimately do believe. Communists don't think democracy, the concept of democracy, is sacred, but democracy does correspond to communism if by democracy we mean a people's state ruled by the people, of the people, by the people, for the people, yes. Now, does that have to take the form of a direct electoral democracy of the central leader? No, I mean, that wasn't the case historically, but elections are a useful tool to determine what kind of leaders people want, especially at local levels. There's a huge electoral system within China, both for the people's government and the Communist Party. It's just, there's nothing sacred about it in and of itself. But it depends on what's meant by democracy. If what's meant by democracy is American pluralistic, multipolar liberalism, of course not. No.
Yeah, I would say true democracy comes with the people supporting of a leader and an idea, and it's the truest form, not being brainwashed by television and going to vote on red or blue.
Okay. From Sun State, how many peasants died in Mao's Great Leap Forward, Haas?
A great deal, many people died during the Great Leap Forward, but these are the premises of industrial modernity as a whole. And when you're engaging in an industrial modernity from scratch, the result is you're pretty much fucking with people, with how people have fed themselves for like hundreds and maybe even thousands of years, yeah, that is going to lead to some kind of crisis and whatever. And I should point out the Great Leap Forward was not simply because the West wasn't going to invest in China at the time. It's also because China didn't Mao didn't want to be reliant upon the Soviet industrial system. He wanted to create an indigenous Chinese industrialization. So that was the price for it. Hopefully, I mean, in the future, I think communists should be committed to learning the mistakes of both the great famines. And I think with China's path now, China has freed communists globally from ever having to do that again, because China itself has already accumulated a great concentration of capital, which it can use to help the development of other countries so that they don't have to do this.
From Zoltan. This is from the 1933 Fascist Rocco Corporatism laws. If the transfer of control of capital from shareholders to the workers of the company. Zoltan, there's like 19 books that argue China is a corporatist state, and you even have Keith Wood's video. The rapid industrialization is actually very similar to Bismarck's state socialism growth reforms.
I actually think comparison to like Bismarck or even Japan in the 19th century is way more accurate than fascism, but I still think it's a wrong comparison. But I guess it's more accurate to compare it to Bismarck's reforms.
Well, they have a regional corporatist system there now, regional, like not by occupation. So it's unique in that sense, something that could work in America with the state identities, but it's definitely a corporatist system.
Well, I mean, corporatism has a specific historical connotation. It's like I don't know if you can call it corporatist. I mean, what do you
national
mean
syndicalist then? I mean, if corporatism is national syndicalist.
No, I mean to say, how is China corporatist in a sense? Like, for example, a lot of things can be called a corporate. If a corporate merely means, like maybe in Hegel's sense, some kind of synthesis between the state and civil society, I mean, yeah, every country has that, you know?
It's more like off of, let's say, a guild system, and they have 30 guilds set up by regional districts that control those districts, all controlled by the state above it, but they take care of their work. And how you tell who's doing the best is by what they produce and how they're doing. So it's a competition amongst the guilds.
Would you say
themselves.
like a kolkhoz is a corporate?
You'd have to explain it for me, yeah.
Like a collective farm?
No, I wouldn't. Because the collective farm, who has to say in the collective farm? Because from like what I've heard, those were messes, and a lot of people didn't even have a chance to eat their own food they grew.
Well, but the difference is that they were decentralized. Like there were many different collective farms with varying degrees of success and performance, and they even kind of competed with each other in a sense. So
that would be, I guess, like that when you're talking about they compete with each other and they're their own brackets. That would be a form of a syndicalist setup. But I just know everyone went away, like as you said, as even.
I think the issue with calling it syndicalist is because you have to understand the historical meaning of the syndicate is the unions that had existed at that time that were already in place. So it's a specific historical context.
Yeah, well, corporatism all evolved. Guild, syndicates, national syndicalism, corporatism. Right, they all kind of matured, much like the communist countries learned, hey, we can't do the community farms, we can't do central planning, we need to adapt our socialism. And once again, socialism, with the Chinese spirit, right? They had to add their own thing to it, and that's kind of how the corporations came about too. With guild systems, then people were fighting for syndicates, then national syndicalism came around.
I don't know. To me, the Chinese system is too interlaced at all levels. For there to be a discrete corporate I can identify.
Well, it's broken up into regional corporations, so I mean, I don't know.
I mean, it's not just the horizontal breaking up. There's vertical. It's all interconnected. Everything is.
Well, that's what corporatism is, interconnected. They're not that's the whole point of it.
Well, I mean to say, like, where is the specific corporate in China? Like, what would be an example of a corporate?
The regions of China.
So are those the governments in the specific regions? Or
well, yeah, the government oversees like you said, it's in just like under third position corporatism. The capitalist exists.
I think it's more complex. It's more complex than that, because like the way in which, for example, the economy of the regions and the economy nationwide, how all that is coordinated with the central government, it's just more complex. I don't know if corporatism would be accurate.
Well, that's how it's broken up into corporations. I'll link you this video on the private, and you can watch it on your own time, and maybe we'll have another talk about it, where it's breaking down how China has adapted to regional corporatism.
Is that the Keith Woods video?
No. This is from a Chinese economist that's in China, and he was explaining how they went off of this. No, I wouldn't send you something directly from what they're talking about.
Okay, so from Zoltan. So what would infrared say about the 3 different factions in the CCP who use Schmidt? One of them specifically has been arguing China is a fascist state internally for a year now.
I am not aware. There is no faction within the CCP that calls China a fascist state. There are wacky intellectuals within China that talk about China as a fascist state. It's an imperial state. It's a monarchy. All sorts of things from the imagination. Regarding the newfound interest in Carl Schmitt, though, I don't see the German conservative revolution as inherently fascist, actually. The thinkers of the German conservative revolution had a very mixed relationship to German fascism and Italian fascism. I think it's important to separate these two phenomena, because the German conservative revolution, to me, was much more deep than that. It wasn't just about fascism specifically. It was about a more broad re-evaluation of the relationship between modernity and tradition, and so on and so on. It's almost like the timing was that fascism emerged at the same time as the conservative revolution, but they're not the same.
Does that matter that much, to where if China's learning from conservative authoritarian Germans, or if they're learning from like Gentile, like, to you, would that like make them not communist anymore?
No,
or
of course not. Of course not. I mean,
Some people are dogmatic about it. So
listen, one of the greatest influences on my thinking intellectually is Heidegger. Of course, politically, Heidegger, I'm completely opposed to his political decision to be in the Nazi party. But there's way more to his thinking than just that. Same is true for all the other conservative revolution thinkers, who I'm pretty sure influenced a lot of different people. You know, it's not just, you know.
Yeah, I don't like the dogma. That's what I find with, especially speaking to Marxists.
Yeah, I mean, like, for example, when it comes to Gentile, I don't just say, oh, he's a fascist, so he's wrong. I have a specific criticism. You know, it's not. It's
you're
real.
Materialist, right? That's your criticism. Yeah.
Well, I mean,
that's why I didn't even want. That's even a moot point. That's
Yeah.
We know we're going to disagree on that.
So from Western Artifact, Haas, why do you think buzzwords like establishment win the debate? Point is, who was the better system? Your argument isn't proving quality.
Well, the problem is that you view political realities like a Minecrafter, and you view political realities like some kind of like Reddit nerd who thinks they're like designing blueprints and comparing abstract systems. But the reality is, we have establishments. We have established, insular, stagnant ruling class that is all interconnected with each other, that mingle with one another and subsist on the basis of established, that's the key word, established institutions. And then we contrast an establishment with the people, because whereas an establishment is what's already established, the people contain potentialities that are not yet established or actualized. So it's, if you just used your common sense and didn't treat politics like a Minecrafter, it would make a lot of sense. But you insist on being a nerd and wasting my time. So, you know.
From Sermon, I'm 40 minutes behind. He says that China doesn't invade countries. China has birth tourism that is their people, as their people have children in sapien. And then that was like one, and then he listed number two is China takes over farms and markets in small countries like Oceania, etc., forcing the indigenous population into wage slavery.
If that's true, I have to look at the specific case by case. If that's true, it's not because China is invading anyone, it's because the governments of those countries are not giving proper representation to their people. And that's not China's fault. Unless you want China to invade countries and engage in nation building, which is not something it'll ever be committed to doing. So it sounds like you're complaining that China isn't America. China doesn't want to overthrow governments and make people have good governments. It's almost like China will just do business with whatever government is in place because it's not their business. It's the business of the people living in that country.
What about China and Australia, though? I mean, they're using
It's
their
the
money
best case. It's the best case because
to buy out a country and then kind of turn it into
well, that's their right.
That's imperialism, though. That's a
No,
form
no,
of
no,
imperialism.
no. Hold on. It's not imperialism because that's the Australian liberal free market system. If Australia doesn't want that system, of course China will respect them. China will respect the people who stand up and say, we want to protect our people's interests. China will respect that. But why should China respect Australia when Australia will allow it? I mean, if Australia is going to allow it, they may as well. And moreover, I mean, Australia and is part of the American Anglo-Saxon system, and these same countries, the Five Eyes Alliance, are always lecturing and being smug to China about how their system is so much better. So okay, China will say, if your system is so much better, then you should have no qualms with us buying your property, and you still have your superior liberal system. We're not forcing you to do anything. We're doing it in the free market. That's that. It's not China's fault. How is it their problem?
So as long as the governments are willing to pretty much sell out their future for immediate bang for their buck.
But whose fault is that? Is this China's fault or is this the Australian
government's fault?
It's the business of the Australian people, what kind of government they have.
Yeah, I view it as power politics, but I do see it as economic imperialism, though. I mean, I'm not even morally saying it's good or bad.
Well, here's what would make it economic imperialism. It would be economic imperialism if China, for example, was orchestrating coups and political interventions to keep the Australian government propped up, much like how France continues to do this in West Africa, and how America does this, and Britain and America do this for the whole world, and Latin America, and so on and so on. That would be economic imperialism. But if, as a result of Australia's existing laws and its existing government, China finds certain opportunities, I mean, it's like, how do you blame China for that? China's not impure. It's not.
I'm not saying to blame. Like, I'm not moralizing the moves. I look at it as power politics, but I'm just saying it's a form of imperialism.
Well,
but not moralizing it. It's just
it's not imperialist because that's the superior liberal Anglo-Saxon free system, and that's the freedom that they want and they have. So.
All right, so we're going to do 2-minute closing statements. So, CT, you want to go first?
Yeah, interesting conversation. I wish we could have got more into the today stuff and where we differ, but Haas didn't seem like he's interested in politics at all outside of the People's Party. Was that the party you said? The third party?
Whatever real third party can emerge, then it will have my interest. But I think that's the one, I think for now, which seems to be the most promising, but maybe it won't be. And
maybe something else will come around, and maybe it might be an individual or something.
I don't know. We have to see.
Yeah. So I would just say, check out the platform, people, on newfrontierusa.org. See what people are running on. I would put that platform up against any other party or any other person out there creating a platform to run for position. If people are concerned with collectivism and socialism and nationalism and having a reason, I would definitely check out that platform and see it for yourself and support it. It was a good chat. I enjoyed it. Thanks, Haas, for the conversation. Maybe we'll have it again.
Sure. Like I said, it's mainly a question of ideology and history, which is not necessarily to be confused even though it's often interrelated with the current concrete political realities. So this is the point upon which we disagree primarily. Now, something I do want to address was that I was taken by surprise because, obviously it wasn't your fault because you didn't know, but because of Twitch's strict policies or whatever. And a lot of people in the chat right now were celebrating, like, I ran away from the debate and I was too scared to debate. And I just want to say to you people specifically, what do you have to say now, bitches? Like, you really look stupid now, don't you? You look dumb as fuck. And I really continued this debate mostly out of pettiness, just because I wanted to spite those people, like.
Somebody yells at the chat.
Yeah. So.
Oh my god. Okay.
You pay a lot of attention to the chats, I see. Yeah.
He gets mad at them. It's funny. All right. So thank you guys both for coming on. So our Discord has been shut down twice in 1 week. So we are in the process of kind of figuring it out. We have a VIP Discord for people that we trust that won't get us shut down. We're waiting to make our public one, but I just did drop the link tree in the chat, and we did make a Telegram and some gilded thing that we're working on as well, because there's just a lot of people trying to get us shut down. So that's that. Follow us on Twitter, though. That's where you can find like any of our stuff when we do get shut down on platforms. Tomorrow night we are going to be back at 9 p.m. Eastern with a debate on whether or not the press is the enemy of the people. So yeah, that is about all for that. And
check that link to that video, Haas, in your private chat before you get out.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So Todd, you got anything before we close?
No, thank you very much. I do appreciate it. You both are gentlemen. Thank you.
Right.
Okay. Yep. See you later. Bye-bye.
All right.